I paid the rent. I paid the bills. I cooked their meals. I even covered their medical co-pays. And still, one morning, my mother-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "We don't need you anymore. You're redundant." They were kicking me out of the home I built, so the pregnant wife of my husband's son could move in. No one stood up for me. Not my husband, not his son, not even the man I once believed would protect me. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I walked out with silence and a folder full of receipts. This isn't a story of revenge. It's a story of truth, of reclaiming my place, of refusing to disappear. Because this time, I didn't stay quiet. I stayed smart. I didn't know the day I said, "I do," was the day I quietly agreed to disappear. They say marriage is the beginning of a shared life. For me, it was the beginning of my erasure. My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 46 years old, a licensed clinical pharmacist with nearly 2 decades in the field. I met Gerald through a mutual friend when I was nearing 40, a man with quiet confidence, a freshly ironed shirt, and eyes that seemed to soften every time he spoke. Divorced, with a teenage son, he was the first man who didn't flinch when I told him I couldn't have children due to a surgery in my late 20s. "I don't want a child," he had smiled gently. "I want a partner." I believed him. 2 years later, we were married in a small ceremony on a windy October afternoon. I moved into his condo, a spacious 2-bedroom unit in a high-rise near downtown. What he failed to mention was that the condo also housed his mother, Vivian, and his son, Brandon. I didn't mind. I had been alone long enough that the hum of family, even with its awkward pauses and unspoken glances, felt almost comforting. The first few weeks were a blur of adjustment. I learned how Vivian liked her tea scalding hot, how Brandon preferred silence over small talk, and how Gerald always fell asleep with the TV on. It wasn't the warm embrace of a rom-com family, but it was a start. I didn't expect love from them. I expected time. But time, as I would learn, is a cruel thing when spent in a house that doesn't want you. Vivian was always polite. Too polite. The kind of civility that slices cleaner than cruelty. She never raised her voice, never insulted me outright. Instead, she would leave little notes about how the towels should be folded a certain way, or how Brandon's shirts were too wrinkled for a woman of my background. I ignored them. I told myself it was generational. I told myself she was just grieving the loss of her daughter-in-law, Brandon's mother. I told myself I was being too sensitive. Brandon, 16 at the time, barely looked at me. He kept to himself, rarely speaking unless prompted, and even then, his responses were clipped. I chalked it up to teenage moodiness, but there were moments too quiet to be noticed if you weren't looking, where I caught Vivian whispering to him behind closed doors, glancing toward me, her tone hushed but firm. Once I overheard her say, "Don't let her replace your mother." That stung more than I care to admit. Still I stayed, because Gerald was kind, because I believed I could earn my place, because love, at its core, is about staying. I began adjusting my schedule. I dropped my hospital rotation shifts to take on more flexible pharmacy consulting work, which meant less prestige but more time at home. I cooked dinners. I offered to help Brandon with college prep. I paid for a family trip to Chicago, because Vivian had always dreamed of seeing the Art Institute. I did everything I could to become indispensable. But in that house, I was never seen, only tolerated. When Brandon left for college, I thought things would get better, that maybe the silence at the dinner table would soften, but it only grew louder. Vivian started taking over the kitchen again, pushing my meals aside with a passive-aggressive smile. Gerald began spending longer hours at work. And me? I began to vanish slowly, painfully, and completely unnoticed. Until one day, I overheard a phone call. Vivian was in the living room, her voice raised in uncharacteristic excitement. Yes, you and Lena should definitely move in. There's plenty of space now that she's here less. I stopped at the hallway, frozen. Lena Brandon's new wife was pregnant, and apparently they were planning to move in. No one had told me. I waited until dinner to ask Gerald. His response? I didn't think it mattered. I laughed then, a sharp, bitter laugh that startled even myself. Of course, I said, because I've never mattered in this house. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He simply got up, rinsed his plate, and left the room. That night, as I lay in the guest bedroom, because Vivian had reclaimed the master bedroom for Brandon and Lena, I stared at the ceiling and counted all the times I'd chosen silence over confrontation, all the times I'd folded into myself to keep peace, all the dinners I cooked, all the bills I paid, all the damn birthdays I remembered when no one remembered mine. And I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just being erased. I had allowed it, but not anymore. The moment had come, and I was done waiting to be seen. It's funny how silence can grow louder than any scream. After Brandon left for college, I naively believed that the house might finally breathe easier. That maybe, just maybe, Vivian would see me not as an intruder, but as the woman who had stayed. The one who cooked her meals when she was ill, who paid for her physical therapy without saying a word, who remembered the anniversary of her late husband when no one else did. But what I hoped would be peace turned into something else, something far more isolating. Vivian began to speak even less to me. No more good mornings, no polite commentary about the weather. She moved around the apartment like a quiet shadow, claiming corners I had once thought were mine. My kitchen utensils began to disappear, replaced by hers. The tea I liked was pushed to the back of the cabinet. My favorite mug vanished altogether. And when I asked, she just shrugged and said, "Maybe you left it at work." I hadn't, but I let it go, because by then I had learned the rules of this place. You survive by being smaller. Gerald, oblivious or willfully blind, never seemed to notice. He'd come home late, kiss my cheek distractedly, and disappear into his office to catch up on work. I tried to share moments' little updates from the pharmacy, funny customer stories, a new skincare product I was testing. But his eyes always glazed over by the second sentence. Eventually, I stopped sharing. There was one moment, though, just one, that broke through the monotony. It was Brandon's birthday. He was turning 22. I bought him a modest but thoughtful gift, a rare book on photography, signed by his favorite artist. I had found it online, spent hours verifying its authenticity. I wrapped it in textured paper, tied a grey ribbon around it, and placed it on the dining table next to a card I wrote by hand. That evening, I came home to find the wrapping torn open, the card still in its envelope, and the book gone. Vivian was sitting on the sofa, sipping tea. "Did Brandon like the gift?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She looked up at me with that same bland smile she wore when correcting me about towel folding. "Oh, I gave it to Lena. She's pregnant, you know. It's better that we show her some support." "But it was for Brandon," I said quietly. Vivian tilted her head. "And Lena is his wife. That's what families do, Clara. We take care of our own." I stood there for a long moment, trying to decide whether to scream, cry, or just laugh. Instead, I went to the bedroom and shut the door. That night, Gerald didn't come home. He texted that he was staying late at work. I didn't believe him. I laid in bed with a dull ache in my chest, the kind that comes not from heartbreak, but from the realization that you are a guest in the life you helped build. Every photo on the wall, every fork in the drawer, every light switch I touched, I had contributed to all of it. And yet I was invisible. Not because they couldn't see me, but because they chose not to. The thing about sacrifice is, when it's silent, people assume it was never made. After that birthday incident, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to win anyone over. I still cooked dinner, still folded the towels just right, still paid for the groceries and utilities, but the warmth was gone. My presence in that house became purely functional. I was the ghost that swept the floors and paid the internet bill. Gerald never noticed. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care to ask. By then, the dynamic of our home had settled into an unspoken contract. Vivian ran the house, Gerald earned the image of being a provider, and I held the structure together quietly, financially, emotionally, invisibly. But the truth behind that facade was much messier. Gerald's company had been in decline for years. The once proud manager was now middle-aged, holding on to a title and a department with shrinking budgets. His bonuses had vanished. Raises, a thing of the past. But he didn't tell Vivian, because pride was the only thing he had left. And he didn't tell me, because he assumed I already knew, and I did, long before he ever admitted it. Our finances had slowly become mine to manage. At first it was just me covering the electricity when his account was low, then the rent, because he had forgotten to transfer, then groceries, phone bills, health insurance copays. By the end of that year, I was shouldering over 70% of our household expenses on a part-time salary that actually paid more than his full-time one. Funny how a woman in healthcare can earn more than a man in denial. Of course, Vivian knew none of this. Gerald didn't dare tell her that I was the one keeping the lights on, both literally and figuratively. She still looked at me like a leech, a burden, a placeholder for the woman she never forgave for leaving. And Gerald, spineless as he had become, let her believe it. I remember one night, shortly before Christmas, I came home late from an emergency shift at the pharmacy. It was snowing, soft and quiet, like the kind of silence that wraps around your bones. I carried 2 grocery bags in freezing hands. I'd stopped to buy ingredients for the next day's dinner because Vivian insisted on hosting Brandon and Lena. When I stepped through the door, the living room was lit. Vivian sat on the couch, her arms crossed, her lips tight. "You didn't pick up the dry cleaning." I looked at her, drenched, exhausted, my fingers numb. "I didn't have time." "You had time to shop. Groceries, for the dinner, for your son and his wife." She scoffed. "Well, maybe if you weren't only working part-time, you'd manage better." I wanted to scream then, to tell her that without my part-time job, she'd be living in the dark, eating instant noodles in a 1-bedroom walk-up. But I didn't. Instead, I put the bags down, took off my coat, and said softly, "Dinner will be ready by 7. Because at some point, when you give so much of yourself and no one sees it, you start to forget you're even there. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a stepmother. I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I was a walking utility bill paid on time and forgotten the next day. That winter, I spent more time talking to my journal than my husband. I wrote things I never said out loud. Things like, "I'm exhausted from pretending I belong here. I wish someone would notice that I'm not okay. I don't know who I am when I'm not being useful." But the most painful entry, "I think I could vanish tomorrow and no one would even ask where I went." And I believed it. I truly did. Until the day they told me to leave. That's when I remembered something far more dangerous than rage clarity. There's a kind of silence that doesn't settle. It rings in your ears long after the words have landed. That's what happened the morning Vivian told me to leave. She didn't shout. She didn't even look me in the eye. She simply set her teacup down on the counter, adjusted her robe like she was preparing for a pleasant conversation, and said, "Clara, we won't be needing you in the house anymore." I blinked. I was still in my pharmacy scrubs, hair damp from the morning shower, lunch packed, ready to go. "Excuse me." She clasped her hands calmly in front of her. "Brandon and Lena are coming home. She's in her third trimester now, and we've decided it's best for the baby if they stay here for a while. It's going to be a full house, and, well, we only need one maternal figure around." My heart thudded. "You want me to leave? For them?" Vivian's smile tightened. "It's not personal, dear. It's just practical. Just practical." I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. It was too absurd. This was my home. My money paid the rent. My name was on the lease. My life had been bent into the shape of this house for the last 2 years. "Does Gerald know about this?" I asked, my voice a whisper now. She tilted her head, smug. "Of course. It was his idea." My hands went cold, my legs weak. I had believed, even in his silence, that he wouldn't go this far. "He didn't tell me," I murmured. Vivian didn't blink. "Well, sometimes men avoid confrontation. But actions speak louder, don't they? Gerald's been spending more time out. It's not hard to see why." She was baiting me, and I was too stunned to bite. "Be out by tomorrow," she added casually, as if she were reminding me to pick up milk. "We'll need the guest room for the crib and changing table." I stood there, motionless, the refrigerator humming behind me like some cruel metronome ticking down to my erasure. Later that evening, I called Gerald's office. His assistant told me he was on vacation 3 days off. Not a business trip, not urgent work. A break. I tried his cell, straight to voicemail. Texts went unanswered. So it was true. The silence, the absences, the slight flinches when I touched him. It wasn't stress. It wasn't work. It was preparation. A soft fade out of a marriage he no longer intended to keep. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I put on my coat and walked, not to anywhere specific. I just walked. Past the bakery where we used to have Sunday brunch, past the old bookstore where I found that rare photography book for Brandon, past the bench where Gerald once told me he felt lucky to have met me. None of those places felt real anymore. Eventually, I ended up at a small corner tavern near the train station, a place we hadn't been in years. "Clara?" the bartender asked, surprised. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I said, sliding onto the stool. "Too long." I ordered a drink, sat back, and for the first time in a long time, I let the silence be mine. That night, I didn't return home, and for the first time in years, no one noticed. The tavern was dim, just the way I remembered it. Same cracked leather booths, same scent of old whiskey soaked into the wood. It had been nearly 5 years since Gerald and I last came here, back when he still reached for my hand under the table. That night, I didn't want to go home. Home didn't exist anymore. I ordered a beer and a plate of grilled chicken, just like we used to. The bartender, Miles, squinted at me like he was dusting off a memory. "You used to come here with a guy in a blue tie, right?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied. "That guy used to be my husband." He gave a sympathetic chuckle and moved on. I sat alone, nursing the beer, when a young woman approached from the kitchen. She looked barely 25, with a kind face and dark hair tied back in a messy bun. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said gently. "Are you Mrs. Whitmore?" I blinked. I. Yes. How do you know that? She hesitated, then sat down across from me without waiting for permission. I recognized you from your phone wallpaper. Gerald's photo was your screensaver, right? I felt the blood drain from my face. Yes. She bit her lip. I thought you should know. He's been coming here for a few months now. With a woman. They usually sit over there. She pointed to the booth behind me. I didn't turn. I thought she was his wife, until I saw your phone just now. My pulse throbbed in my ears. What does she look like? Early 40s, red hair. Wears a lot of perfume. They don't try to hide it. My boss told me not to say anything, but... She paused. You looked like someone who deserves to know. I didn't know what to say. Gratitude and nausea fought inside me. I can text you if they come in again, she offered, sincere. I can take photos. If you need proof. Proof. That word echoed in my chest like a hammer on glass. I gave her my number. When I left the tavern that night, the air outside felt colder than before. But it wasn't the wind that made me shiver. It was the realization that they hadn't just replaced me emotionally. They were preparing to erase me entirely. And for the first time, I no longer felt hurt. I felt alert. The next morning, I woke up in my friend Elise's guest room with a migraine that felt like it had been waiting years to arrive. I hadn't told her the full story. Not yet. Just that things at home had shifted. Elise didn't ask questions. She just poured coffee, handed me a spare key, and reminded me that friendship doesn't require permission. Later that day, I returned to the condo. Not to confront anyone, just to collect a few essentials and grab the documents I had quietly stashed away in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. But the moment I stepped through the front door, something felt off, too quiet. I stepped into the living room to find Brandon and Lena already there. She was propped up on the couch, hand resting on her swollen belly. Brandon sat beside her, arms crossed. He didn't stand. He didn't even look surprised. "What are you doing here?" he asked, like I was the intruder. "I'm just here to pick up some of my things," I replied, calm but cold. "I won't be long." Lena shifted awkwardly. "We thought you'd already moved out." "I haven't signed anything. I haven't agreed to anything. I was told to leave, not asked." That made Brandon smirk. He wanted me gone. That much was clear. But something in his eyes made me pause. It wasn't just dislike. It was confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from being certain the game is already won. As I packed a few files into my tote, I noticed an envelope sticking out from the mail pile on the hallway table addressed to Gerald. But from a legal office I didn't recognize. I didn't touch it. But it stayed in my mind. Back at Elise's, I finally opened my laptop and began combing through our shared finances. Passwords, transaction logs, archived emails. Gerald wasn't as careful as he thought. That's when I found it. An email forwarded from Brandon's work address to Gerald detailing a summary of property ownership law and how non-contributory partners could be excluded from shared property rights if not named on the deed. Attached was a sample court motion. I stared at it, hands cold. He wasn't just Gerald's son. He was Gerald's advisor. Brandon had helped engineer my removal. Likely coached Gerald on how to legally push me out without needing a messy divorce, just enough emotional distance, a few weeks of vacation, and a quiet letter from a lawyer to make it all look clean. But they hadn't counted on one thing. I had receipts. For 5 years, I had paid the rent. For 5 years, I had covered household expenses from my own account, and I had kept every transaction, every receipt, every invoice tucked into folders, quietly, compulsively. I had always believed in being organized, Turns out, that made me dangerous. That night, I sat with my laptop glowing in the dark and whispered to myself for the first time in weeks, "They think they buried me, but they forgot I know how to dig." And I started planning. Not revenge, not even justice, just truth, laid bare. There's something oddly comforting about spreadsheets. They don't lie. They don't shift blame. They don't smirk across dining tables or whisper in corners. They just tell the truth in black, white, and cold, undeniable numbers. That's where I started. I set up my laptop on Elise's kitchen table, opened a blank document, and typed a title across the top. Shared Household Contributions, 2017-2024. Then I began digging. For years, I had kept digital copies of rent receipts, utility bills, grocery expenses, and home repairs. Each saved neatly in folders labeled by year. It wasn't that I had planned for this. I was just thorough, organized, a bit obsessive maybe. The kind of woman who saves warranty cards and color codes insurance forms. Gerald always made fun of it. "You treat dinner receipts like classified files," he once said. Now those files were my fortress. I compiled every payment I'd made, rent payments all through my account, heating bills during winter months, air conditioning repairs I covered when the unit broke down, the refrigerator I bought on sale but paid for in full, grocery runs itemized, co-pays for doctor visits, even for Vivian. And yes, the cleaning service I hired discreetly during the final year, because Vivian began leaving accidents on the floor she refused to acknowledge. It took 2 days. By the end, the document was 27 pages long. Every entry had a timestamp, amount, and reference. I even included email confirmations and bank statements. No emotion, no drama, just numbers. Numbers that said, "I built this life, and I paid for it." On the third day, I visited a lawyer. Her name was Marissa Huang Sharp, efficient and not easily impressed. But as she flipped through my binder, her eyebrows rose higher with each page. "I've never seen someone this prepared," she said finally. "Prepared or paranoid?" I asked. She smiled. "In this case, both are useful." I told her everything. Not just about the finances, but about the subtle abuse, the emotional corrosion, the silence that Gerald weaponized, the way Vivian erased me without ever raising her voice, how Brandon, the boy I once baked birthday cakes for, tried to remove me like a stubborn spreadsheet cell. Marissa took notes, lots of them. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Here's what I think. You have enough financial records to claim cohabitation property rights in civil court, especially in this state. You were not just a guest in that home. You were a contributor. If they try to evict you without legal grounds, you have a case, a strong one." I nodded. "I don't want revenge. I just want clarity." "You want recognition," she said, "and protection." "Exactly." So we discussed possible next steps: letters of notice, asset protection, a temporary injunction if they tried to dispose of shared items. She would handle the legal side. Mine was emotional, because now that I had the truth in my hands, I could finally see what had been denied to me all along. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't disposable. I was deliberate. And from that moment forward, I stopped reacting. I started directing. There's something terrifying about a woman with receipts, boundaries, and absolutely nothing left to lose. And Gerald, Brandon, and Vivian were about to learn that the hard way. The morning I returned, it was raining hard, slicing sideways like the sky was tired of holding back. I wore black. Not for mourning, but for clarity. I wasn't there to grieve the home I'd lost. I was there to show them it was never truly theirs to take. When I knocked on this door, it wasn't Gerald who answered. It was Brandon. His face registered something between confusion and mild irritation, as if I was a mail carrier bringing bad news. "I need a few things I left," I said simply. He moved aside without a word, but the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed him. Inside, the apartment looked different, cold, impersonal. Some new furniture had been added. A sterile white couch, a new TV stand, but it all looked borrowed, temporary, like a hotel room with a borrowed soul. Lena sat on the sofa, swollen belly cradled by both hands. She gave me a tight nod, not hostile, not welcoming, just awkward. Vivian was in the kitchen, staring at me like she was waiting to pounce. "You've taken enough, haven't you?" she hissed. "What could you possibly want now?" "I'm not here for your things," I replied. "I'm here for mine." Vivian's face twisted. "You think this place is yours? You're delusional." Gerald entered then from the hallway, hair wet, probably just out of the shower. He froze when he saw me. "Clara, don't," I said, holding up one hand. "Let's not do the performance. You knew I was coming." He nodded slowly. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Thick, neat, heavy. "These are the receipts for every rent payment I made over the last 5 years," I began, placing the folder on the table. "Utility bills, grocery runs, repairs, medical copays, appliance purchases. I kept records of everything, because someone in this house had to." Gerald remained still, eyes cast downward. Brandon scoffed. "That doesn't mean anything. You were living here too." I met his gaze. "Yes, and contributing, which gives me rights, financially, legally." Vivian slammed her mug down. "You think a stack of receipts makes you part of this family?" "No," I said quietly. "But they prove I built this life when the rest of you only lived in it." Lena looked at Gerald then, confused. "Is this true?" Gerald opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I didn't wait for an answer. "By the way," I continued, voice calm but unwavering, "this building is rent-controlled. My name is on the lease. Not Brandon's, not Lena's, not Vivian's, mine. And since Gerald forfeited his financial obligation years ago, you all have 30 days to make alternate arrangements." Brandon stood. "You're bluffing." I turned to him. "Try me. The court papers are already in motion." Silence. For the first time in months, I felt tall. Vivian's voice cracked through the quiet. "You're destroying this family." "No," I said gently. "You did that the moment you made me invisible." I gathered my things, turned to Gerald. "I'll be in touch through my lawyer. If you want to discuss anything, do it in writing." He opened his mouth again, but I was already walking away. The door closed behind me, like the final line of a long, bitter chapter. And just like that, the silence wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. Freedom doesn't come with fireworks. It comes in the quiet. I left the apartment without slamming the door, without a final glance, without a single word that hadn't already been said. The rain had stopped. The streets glistened with the memory of it. Back at Elise's, I slept for 12 hours straight. No dreams, just weightless, uninterrupted rest, the kind I hadn't had in years. I woke up to birdsong and the soft hum of her espresso machine. The house smelled like cinnamon and clean linen. "I think I'm done," I said, unprompted, as she handed me a mug of coffee. Elise didn't ask what I meant. She just nodded and said, "Finally." Over the next few days, I wrapped up everything. I filed the legal notices through Marissa. She handled the paperwork, the filings, the letters. The condo, now under dispute, was placed in review. The lease was frozen. No one could be evicted or assigned without mutual consent until the case closed. Gerald tried to call. Once. I let it ring. Then I blocked his number. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. From Brandon. The envelope was plain, the handwriting neat, almost too formal. Inside was a handwritten note. No greeting. No dear Clara. Just words. I didn't realize what I was doing. I just wanted to protect my dad. I didn't see you. I didn't want to. But now I get it. You were always the one holding us up. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find peace. You earned it. I read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not to revisit, just to remind myself I wasn't crazy. I gave up the apartment claim shortly after, not because I lost, but because I didn't want it. That place had already taken enough from me. I wanted something mine. I signed a lease for a one-bedroom unit near the pharmacy small, sunlit, with hardwood floors and a quiet balcony. I donated most of the furniture I had taken, sold a few things, and moved in with only what I truly needed. No ghosts, no remnants of other people's expectations. And for the first time, I bought myself a houseplant. A stubborn little fig tree. I named her Still, because after everything, I was still standing. The pharmacy welcomed me back without question. My co-workers hugged me tighter than I expected. One of them even cried. I didn't realize how much I missed being seen until someone looked at me and asked, "How are you really?" I told them the truth. I'm learning how to be whole again. Every Sunday, I walk to the park and sit on a bench with my journal. I write things like, "Peace isn't loud. Letting go is not the same as losing. I'm not what they made me feel like. I'm more." I never tried to find out what happened to Gerald, or Brandon, or Vivian. Maybe they stayed. Maybe they imploded. Maybe they learned something. Maybe they didn't. It's not my story anymore. Mine is the one where I chose myself. And this time I stayed.